Magic happens where it happens. Target customer, right, is walking around saying, "Oh, I had this brilliant conversation the other day. I wish I could have recorded it." Maybe you should start getting in that habit because if you've got tools like what we're offering and advisors to help you figure out what do I do with that conversation? Where does it fall in line of the message I'm trying to send? It's almost like you want to have a recording button on almost all the time.
What are the elements to planning? Know your audience,
Yep.
know your message. We start with why am I writing this book? How does it fit into
Okay.
my ecosystem? If I know why I'm writing a book and how it fits into my ecosystem, then I start talking about my audience. What does my audience want? Where do they consume content? How am I going to create that content? How do I figure out what they're looking for? How do I figure out what they're talking about? Market research, online tools.
Now, as you're saying that, one
Yep.
thing that's occurring to me, we do want to control how long we pay attention to any one particular thing because you and I can get on a roll talking about certain things. There's those 5 stages, right?
Mm.
Planning, writing, editing, publishing, marketing. A lot of what we're talking about is also marketing, right? Creating offers, knowing who's going to support you, who are your champions, supporters, resistors, bystanders. That's really good. What a lot of authors do is they think that we're talking in a linear fashion. So you don't think about marketing until the book is done. No, actually, you got to be thinking about it before the book starts, as
Yeah.
well as throughout the process.
When we're looking at your support system, you need a support system for writing, for one, because your writing is going to take time away from other activities, and your support
Yep.
system has to be there to help you with that, or you're going to encounter resistance. And a supporter will turn into a resistor, and that's going to take people away from the task of writing their book. In
Mhm.
addition, when it comes to editing, you're going to want people around you who can read the book and give you various perspectives, especially if you don't have a professional editor on board. But even if you do have a professional editor on board, it's beneficial to have somebody else in the process who knows the message, who can look across your manuscript as well and help you pull that together as part of the editing process. And then, like you talk about for marketing, who's going to help you get the word out? Because if you have no connections on social media and you have no followers, are you going to put it outside on your mailbox and put a little sign out and say book available 9.99? Because you can disappear on Amazon unless you have other ways of getting the word out about your book, and that comes down to your support system.
And publishing too, right? So there's all those tiny little nitty-gritty details. So you're think people think publishing, what does that mean? Oh, printing press and there's a so you're talking about yes, formatting it into a printable form, but then there's also uploading it with the Library of Congress, getting the ISDN code, getting it up on Amazon, getting it up on Barnes and Noble, getting it up on any other website. There's a digital version, there's a print version. There may be an audio version you want to record too. You want somebody else who has a better eye for it designing that cover, strategizing how is the cover to be designed? How do we align it with your brand? How do we make sure that it's consistent? And what, if any, imagery or colors or design evocative schemes do you want to use on the front and the back side of that so that when it's sitting in an airport somewhere or in a bookstore or you see it online, it says, hey, read me, right? So people are like drawn to it.
It's important to know your support system up front, or you're going to encounter resistance in all sorts of ways and not be able to make it through some of those because you will come to an impasse of lack of knowledge to get through some things like you're talking about with publishing or marketing.
Yeah. And if this is your first time, another thing that's going to factor into this that goes back to the planning stage is where does this book fall in the crumb trail that you're trying to take that target client through? It does apply to what I'm doing. It is useful knowledge, but I can't drop it into a certain point on my funnel and expect results from it because it's not a guide on the offer that I'm really making to the market right now. It's more a guide on how I built the foundation of my business. And I can offer it to people, but it's a bonus to get to know me.
The content I put on the slides and even the design of them with that whole little strip across the top of where you're at in this progression, designed to go back into a complete course. It should
Right.
be the combination of our webinars broken off into pieces. You go through these different areas along with Q&A at the end. It's not just a hour-long webinar that you're watching as part of your course. It's different slices, but they all follow the progression from planning to writing to editing, publishing. That type of methodology for building the other pieces of content I think would be important as well. So if we're talking about writing and publishing a book, maybe we're going to talk about doing a podcast or something like that next. The same general theme, the same general progression all apply.
This is very transferable because, again, what we're coming back to here is effective communication as the umbrella. That's key to success in any business. You've got to be able to communicate. If you can't do a good job of communicating to customers, to stakeholders, to donors, to shareholders.
Yeah. I've got a good friend who wants to start a podcast, and he wanted to invite people into his office and just start talking. I expanded on, why do you even want to have this podcast? If it's to talk about your county and all of the great things that are going on in the community, maybe it's worth getting out to those businesses rather than just having those businesses come to you. What look and feel are you going for? Is it really people just sitting around a table talking about this stuff? Do you want to show it on video? And if you do want to do any of that stuff, then we just need a bigger plan of what you want it to look like. And that expanded from that planning phase into a whole can of worms of what's the end result, what are you going to be proud of, and what really suits you in the long haul, rather
Mhm.
than going down a path that's really not going to produce the end result that you're looking for. And it was all a 1 hour conversation to figure that out for him. And the answer for him was to pause for a little bit because he doesn't have the time to commit to the end result he's looking for.
That goes back to what I ask at the outset is, who do you think you're writing to? And then who are you really writing to?
Yeah.
That's a really good question to ask yourself anytime you're sitting down to do a podcast, a book, a website, a blog. I think this person is out there. Is that who's actually going to listen to me or read what I have to say? That could be two disparate audiences in subtle ways.
One of the tensions that we live under is perfect is the enemy of good, or in this case, done is better than perfect.
Yeah.
That's one side of that tension. The other side is, unless you start down a path that's going to get you the results that you're going to be proud of,
Mhm.
don't go down any other path. Instead, they'll devote that time and effort into something else that's more beneficial to your life or your business. And that's where counting the cost at the front end is a great idea. Spend a little bit more time in planning before you just embark on an expedition. I had 10 manuscripts partially started over the past decade. Was it beneficial? Maybe, questionably so, but it came together at the right time when I really devoted the time and effort to it and the space, and I knew the space it was going to take up.
I remember you talking about the same thing in your book. You said, sometimes the early bird gets the worm, and other times good things come to those who wait. Which one is it?
They both are true, and they live in conflict with one another, and that's okay.
Mhm.
It is that tension which drives us forward. Without that tension, I think we would just sit still. From a course strategy, let's say we want to train somebody how to do their own webinar,
Yeah.
because everything that we're doing is directly transferable. We ought to be speaking to the people that we know,
Mhm.
offering them these solutions. Here's how to do a webinar. You're going to create your images in Canva. You're going to get a platform like Restream. You could also use StreamYard. You could also use Zoom. You could also use Google. Here are your different options. I know all those tech options. I've used them all. Here's how you can do social media videos. We decided to record everything, and then we pulled back into the script. Here's how we created the micro content. If we put all that into an outline, we have one hell of a put your own webinar course
A
available.
webinar on how to do a webinar. Yeah.
Exactly. Right.
That's why I don't do it, and that's why I need to partner with you because you actually know how to do it.
I can lend my knowledge and experience and expertise to make it into something that it wouldn't be on its own. So you, for instance, you've got all this writing your book content. I got the technical chops to pull this whole thing off. It's funny to think about you making a webinar to put on a webinar, but I take for granted all the stuff that I know.
Yeah.
And yet I have calls all the time with somebody, hey, how do I do this? What do I do here? I know all of these things. I've immersed my entire life in these things. And
Yeah.
I've just to have one-off conversations. Well, that's not very smart. Package it up.
Similar parallel, but for me, it's like people come to me with things, and I'm just able to take as much of what they say as what they don't say and just put it on blast. And all of a sudden, it opens up this vista for them. They're like, boy, I never thought of it that way. I've never even said it that way. But since you say it, it's like bullseye words. I think we'll complement each other nicely in that regard. Is I'm always tempted to feel like, well, what kind of a big deal is that? To some people, it's a big deal, and I take for granted that they can do that. Same way you take for granted that people can do programming and all the stuff that you've learned how to do.
A lot of the most basic things that we know are so highly leveraged in somebody else's experience. The ability to live stream, I take that absolutely for granted. I've done hundreds of them in all sorts of ways from a technical perspective with all sorts of content. It is such a no-brainer to me. And yet, for you, who's immersed yourself into writing books, which is not something that I have done, and now putting those two things together, it is a case where 1 + 1 is 3, not 2. And
Yep.
that I think is the magic of maintaining good quality connections with people and then pushing your experience and expertise into this big soup. And you come off with something where the ingredients make something tasty at the end. And I'm really regret putting that whole visual into my head because that is a dumb thing to say.
I'm flexible that way. I can access that kind of humor.
Why are we talking about stew?
Yeah.
Makes no sense.